My name's Gary Stevenson. I'm the author of The Trading Game, and we are going to talk a little bit about inflation. The first thing I want to say is I was going crazy about inflation from the very beginning of the COVID epidemic. I wrote articles in March 2020. I put out my first video on my YouTube in June 2020 saying we were going to have an inflationary crisis after the end of lockdown. Because in my opinion, it was really obvious right from the beginning of COVID, and I'll explain why. We could see very clearly, very early on, that there was going to have to be a long lockdown and that would be very expensive for the US government, for the UK government. And we knew truly enormous amounts of money were going to be given out. Now, my background, which will be clear if you read the book, is that as a trader who looks a lot at inequality. So when I see that enormous amounts of money are going to be given out by the government, US government, UK government, the first question I'm asking is who's going to end up with that money? The total amount of money given out by the US government since the beginning of COVID, 10 trillion US dollars, which is just under $80,000 for every US taxpayer. What that means is if you are a US taxpayer and you do not have $80,000 cash more now than you did 4 years ago, someone has your $80,000. It's very important that you know who, because if you're going to give out that much money, you are going to dramatically transform your wealth distribution in your country. I was sort of obsessed at the beginning of COVID in understanding who has the money, because it's quite hard to understand where it's gone. The reason that money was given out is because a lot of people lost their jobs during COVID, couldn't work. So you might think that it's people who couldn't work are suddenly rich during COVID, but they're not because they lost their jobs. So if you follow the money one step further, you can look at the corporations. Well, they're not paying wages anymore. Maybe they're richer, but they're not because they're closed down. Well, who normally pays corporations? Well, that's customers. And this is the correct answer. The people who accumulated money during COVID were customers, but not all customers, right? Because if you're an ordinary family from a poor background, you're still paying your rent, still paying your mortgage, still paying your bills. Your expenditure didn't go down. What expenditure collapsed during COVID? Luxury expenditure. Who has the highest luxury expenditure? Rich people. So what happened during COVID was rich people stopped spending because it was illegal, and the government effectively printed money to pay your salary instead, which you used to pay your rent or your mortgage. It went to rich people and rich people kept it. Imagine if we brought in a tax that took $80,000 from every US taxpayer and gave it to the rich. What would you expect to happen? Explosion in inequality, living standards for the rich getting much better and ordinary people getting much poorer. We literally caused inequality to increase at the fastest rate in the history of the country during a time when the economy was literally closed, and we were surprised when living standards collapsed on the reopen. The most frustrating thing about this is it's fixable, because we can reverse those inequality increases by taxing the rich. One thing that I want to make clear is when I say tax rich people, I'm not talking about lawyers and doctors and heaven forbid maybe even bankers. I was a very successful banker and I earned a lot of money and I paid a lot of tax. I was paying over 60% at the peak of my career. And at the same time as I did that, the Duke of Westminster, who is a member of the British aristocracy, inherited £10 billion and paid nothing. You know, what we have in my country and in your country are increasingly class-based tax systems where hard-working people from poor and ordinary backgrounds work hard and pay a huge amount of tax, and very, very wealthy people from very, very wealthy backgrounds don't work, make enormous amounts of money and pay nothing. We need to shift the tax system away from taxing working people and towards taxing this small amounts of individuals who increasingly own everything in our countries and are driving our families and our governments into debt. It's about shifting tax, in my mind, away from work and towards wealth. It's the only way to prevent inequality from getting higher and higher and living standards from falling. And I'm not just saying that, I'm betting on it. I've got a long track record of being right, and I don't want to be right on this one anymore. Good luck.